Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we have the Senate Democratic leader here. I'm going to ask him if there's anything Democrats and Republicans agree on, and then Dave Patti from the Pennsylvania Business Council joins me. He'll react to the senator. And I want to talk to David about education and what to do about all of these, what are they called, standards? We'll get into that with him after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, welcome back to the program. Before I get to Senator Costa, I want to thank our viewers around the state and on WGAL, where on WGAL we were the most watched show last year among adults. Of all the Sunday morning talk and commentary shows, amazing. And it's all as a result of you, the viewers out there, for weighing in, watching the program. We deeply appreciate it. And we have a lot of good guests, like Senator Costa, who joins us. He's out there in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. I'm not going to let him boast on Pittsburgh, but he's
great
like,
town.
I know, it is a great town. All right, Senator, I joked about it, but we often hear of the discord, of the difficulties between the Senate Republicans, Senate Democrats over budgets, liquor privatization, pensions. Take 30 seconds and tell us, can you folks agree on anything?
Well, I think there are a number of things that we agreed upon. Over the course of the past several years, Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans have worked well on a number of issues, Terry. But, I mean, if I point to a couple of things that are really part of what we're dealing with right now, and that is the budget. I think we both recognize and agree that we have to make changes to our pension system. In fact, just yesterday, we've worked with Governor Wolf to put a significant proposal on the table that combines some of the retirement security that I think our viewers want to see with respect to a pension program, but also providing the optional defined contribution plan that gives flexibility, gives portability to employees who may come to work for the Senate. That's a major issue. We also recognize that consumers want to see difference with respect to our wine and spirit shops. They want greater access, they want more access, and they want something done along those lines. Maybe wine in the grocery stores, or maybe more restaurants having the ability to purchase and sell wines. Those are the type of things that I think we agree upon. It's to the degree that we get there is what we have to focus on. Of course, we all want to make investments in education. Again, it comes down to the level of funding that we would want to appropriate. But we agree on a lot of things. It's just about how much we would want to agree on it.
All right, let's go through a couple of these because I think they're important. Let's start first of all with liquor privatization. Voters favor it, but they're not. Doesn't have a lot of intensity in the polls. I mean, it's okay, but it's not an issue I think that a senator or a House member wins or loses on, and it wins an election on. But here's my question to you. The proposal that the governor has put on the table is to turn over the wholesale and retail management of the operation to the private sector for a limited period of time under certain regulations. Is that acceptable to you?
Well, it's tough. I would tell you it's something that we've quite frankly advocated against over the course of the past several years. But Terry, we're at a place now where we have to recognize that we have divided government and that we have to take steps and maybe go further than what we would like to or what we find distasteful. We have to look to make certain that we make the investments in education. This is about, in our view, fixing an educational system with the appropriate level of restoration of dollars. It's about making investments in human service programs.
Right.
It's about growing jobs in our Commonwealth. We have a roadblock. We can't get there without satisfying or appeasing the desires of the Speaker of the House, who wants to see wholesale, retail divestiture. I don't want to go there, but I recognize the greater good of the Commonwealth, and me as a leader have to work with the folks to get a deal done.
4,500 employees work, about 4,500 for the Liquor Control Board operation. Yeah. They control wholesale, retail operation of the state stores, as you know and as our viewers know. They stay.
Well, I think one of the governor, as part of the proposal that's on the table, would be that this private management agreement or private contract would require that the employees continue to work for an entity that would take over the contract. So you would still have an agency that would operate the management of that through the entity through an RFP, but you've got the employees would continue to work for either the LCB, if that's the controlling agency, or work under the management agreement, but they would be protected. That's one of the covenants that we would look to.
And that's been one of the big of all the stumbling blocks with liquor, what the future of the 4,500 employees has been at the heart of it. Would you agree or disagree?
There's no question. That and also the revenue aspect of it. Because we enjoy anywhere from $80 to $100 million a year in net revenue from the LCB to the Commonwealth. Under this proposal, not in addition to having a covenant that says we're going to protect the employees, we also have revenue streams that would mean $150 million in year one, almost doubling what we do now. Year two would be 175, year three would be 200, and then beyond that there'll be a small escalator that each year they'd have to have a little bit more. Okay. So we guarantee and protect the two major things that are important to Senate Democrats is employees and revenue streams.
Basically a compromise.
It is a compromise, and I think it puts on the table exactly what the Republicans wanted, private management of our LCB system. Whatever reason, I can't speak to why Representative Terzai has indicated he's not in favor of that even. But at the end of the day, it's something that we don't necessarily like, but we know that we have a greater good to do, and that is to get a budget done. All
right, I'm talking with the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, Jay Costa. We'll be back following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, welcome back. I'm chatting with Jay Costa. He's the leader of the Senate Democrats. We're talking about the budget, liquor privatization, pensions. Guess what we've been talking about now for the last 2 months. All right, Senator, it looks like the Senate, by the time this show airs, will have likely passed a stopgap funding measure. It looks like about 40%, you'll correct me, of the funding. This is basically to keep the operations that were potentially could get hurt, are getting hurt. And the Democrats are for or against this?
Well, we think that the higher priority should not be putting a stopgap budget forward, but rather sitting down and negotiating a budget. That's precisely why Governor Wolf put two very significant and, quite frankly, historic proposals on the table to try to break this logjam. Our view was, and my view was, and my plea to my colleagues on the Senate side was to let's wait, review the proposals that we have. If that represents a construct of a deal, then we can sit down and negotiate and do a stopgap budget together. They chose to ignore that recommendation and are running through the stopgap budget that will be passed on Friday, tomorrow, Friday, and likely be passed by the House on next Friday. So it'll likely be on the governor's desk by next Saturday, and he'll have to make a decision with respect what to do with that. He's indicated he's not interested in doing it because his preference and our preference is we've screwed around long enough. Let's sit down, let's get together, let's put a budget together, and let's address the things we have to do, and let's compromise. And that's what's been missing here, in my view, Terry. There's not been a level of compromise that's necessary to get a deal done. The governor has consistently gone and moved further and further and further and closer and closer and closer to where the Republicans' position is. But I cannot sit here and say, because I've been in every one of these meetings, that they have moved off where they're at. It's either divestiture of the wine and spirit shops or nothing else. It's either going to be D.C. and only D.C. or nothing else. And by the way, defined contribution. And by the way, we're not going to look to the Marcellus community for any resources to help deal with the structural deficit, because that's what we have.
On the 2 points about the stopgap. Number one is that people will get hurt if you don't do a stopgap. On the other hand, I know, but let's go on the other side. Then the other side is if you do a stopgap, you take all the pressure off for a deal. You just don't make a deal.
There's no question.
There's kind of these two sides. Now, you wanted to weigh in on at least one of the two sides.
Well, I think on the front part, I think that there's no question that agencies would like to have their resources driven out to them. And the governor's going to address that as we go forward with helping them with interest payments and the like if they, in fact, are harmed. School districts won't start to feel the pain for another month or so. But with respect to, as a leader, it's my job to gather votes And that, as you say, the leverage goes away whenever the pressure points are no longer there. So from my standpoint as a leader, my preference is that we not do a stopgap, that we get into a room, we close the door, we address the issues that need to be addressed, and come out and say, we have an agreement, we have a compromise. And that's what we have to focus on, a compromise. We haven't been able to do that. And that's what I think is important at this juncture.
Yeah, I mean, my sense also is, and I've said this and you can agree or disagree, is that I don't remember a time in modern history where this legislature has been more polarized. Yeah. And, you know, I'll be candid. I think Republicans are more conservative and Democrats are more liberal. And the middle doesn't seem. Do you get asked that question at all?
No, you're exactly right. I think we experience a significant shift in the Senate, particularly the Senate Republican caucus. In my view, I'm not in their caucus, but what I see is that there's been a significant shift to the right. We used to have a very strong bipartisan working relationship with the Senate Republican leadership because it was focused sort of on the middle, and we were able to construct things that were not either extreme. That doesn't appear to be the case today because of the 2014 elections, where, quite frankly, where they picked up, they won back 3 seats that we had won.
Right.
And but it's the nature of the individuals who serve in those particular seats are far more conservative than obviously the Democrats that were there, but also the moderate wing of the moderate folks in the South, from the Southeast and other parts of Pennsylvania, Republican caucus. They lack the numbers that they used to have before. And I think that's part of the problem.
No leverage anymore?
The leverage, so that leverage, I think, has gone along those lines. So they're forced to move things more to the right.
So last question before I let you go. Is there, when you think about this, this is a horrible question. When is this going to get done? I mean, it's a good question, but I don't know that there's an answer to it.
That's a great question. I think that we have a couple things on the table that I think are significant, and we may have to work around the edges on those things to get something done. But I can't answer that question right now because if the position of the other side, Terry, is that it's either this or nothing else, then it's going to be a long time before we get done. Yeah. If you've got a willingness to compromise and to find consensus and find common ground, as the governor and we have been doing, moving and closer and closer to where they're at, we'll get to an end. But if if only one party is going to compromise, that's not how you get a deal done, in my view.
All right, thanks for coming in, Senator. All right, coming up after the break, Dave Patti's going to join me. He'll have a little reaction to Senator Costa. We're going to ask him about education standards. We may even talk about, do you have a U.S. Senate election in this state? Yes, we do. Yeah.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
All right, Dave Patti from the Pennsylvania Business Council joins me as often as a guest. He's one of the regulars. We have him in to chat about occasionally all things politics, right, David?
Yep.
All right, let's talk a little bit about what the senator said. Does this look like they're getting closer to a deal, given what Governor
I was struck by
Wolf
two
proposed?
things that the senator said. One, that he said, look, we all agree we need to do something about public pensions. That's not something that was always the case, so that's important. And two, that he said, look, while my caucus and I personally have always opposed liquor privatization or liquor reform, the governor's put something out there. We're willing to talk about it. We think that the governor has made some real concessions.
Right.
Now, the devil's in the details, and I'm sure Republicans may not feel they were huge concessions, but the fact that now, according to the Democratic leader, pension reform and liquor reform of some sorts is on the table.
On the table,
I think that's
where
important.
they weren't before.
I think that's
important. And again, just to go to the liquor issue here, they're talking about giving operational control over the management of the wholesale and retail operations of liquor sales in our state to a private company. The governor's proposal, and David will correct me, is a 10-year lease.
It says 10 to 25 years on his one-page
Minimum
talking
10
points.
years.
So, I mean, again, all that the governor, at least all I've seen that the governor released was a one-pager.
Okay.
And it has some intriguing factors in it. On the other hand, it says you have to keep the 4,500 employees, and one would assume at the same salaries and everything else.
Okay.
You know, I was kind of thinking when Senator Costa was saying, well, yes, we've always worried about those 4,500 employees, and believe me, I don't wish anyone ill in their job.
Sure.
But at the same time, he doesn't acknowledge that when we talk about, say, taxing Marcellus Shale, there are tens of thousands of jobs at stake in that discussion, thousands of whom live in his district. So jobs are jobs, and we need to protect all those jobs.
All right, look, the big issue coming up that the governor's going to have to face is the stopgap funding measure. By that I mean that the state legislature and the governor theoretically would agree to continue to fund programs that shortly are going to be in trouble, services that the state provides, probably not as directly, but more indirectly through schools and county human services, to get them money to keep them operational. David, what do you think the governor does? I mean, how can I ask you that question?
Well, he's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. This is the classic case. He's already been picking winners and losers. He's already been declaring some things to be essential. So, finding ways to send the money out. And no one's been, actually, I was going to say no one's been calling on him. But this week, 15 social service agencies went together and filed a lawsuit against him because he was funding some, but not theirs. What the Republicans are doing is saying, look, across the board, we know that these people have programs, that they're incurring costs, that they continue to provide services. Let's pay them back for what they've incurred thus far.
I got it.
And I think if the governor doesn't sign it, he maybe puts more pressure on Republicans to bargain. But if he doesn't sign it, he hurts people. But
I think also the downside for the governor is that the blame could shift to him if these services aren't provided when the money...
And certainly that's what the Republicans
But then the senator makes a
Sure.
good point. The more you do this, the more you're not likely to reach a deal. I mean, that's the twin...
Well, we're oddly at that point where in the next couple of weeks, the executive agencies normally would start preparing their budget estimates for next year.
Oh, gosh.
Providing those to the governor. Generally, those go to the governor's budget office in mid or so of November.
Right.
And then he's formulating his proposals in December and January to present to the General Assembly in February. So we're really running up against
So we're running against
budget.
the time. All right. I'm chatting with Dave Patti. We're going to run to a break. I want him to explain these teacher evaluations and these performance standards in ways that we'll all understand. I'm putting the pressure on Dave. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
Well, Dave Patti joins me for the final segment of the program. All right, we hear about school performances, teacher evaluations. Give us a quick update that I'll understand.
Well, the update for what's going on right now is a discussion about the recent PSSA tests. These are the exams that started with No Child Left Behind to provide accountability to parents, taxpayers, students themselves, employers, that our students are learning the material.
These are tests that students take.
They take them every couple of years. Well, every year they're taking some version of it. And while the test name remains the same,
okay,
it looked like scores went down this year. Well, what happened is we've meanwhile implemented the new education standards, which are more difficult and much more content there for the students to learn.
Okay.
I liken this to say that when I was in school and we ran the 100-yard dash, we then switched to the 100-meter dash. And the times looked slower. The times weren't slower, we were running farther.
You were running further. So these
we still won the gold medal.
They're taking different tests and they're harder. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, the content is harder. So the test scores have gone down while both the teachers and the students get used to the harder content. And so what Pedro Rivera, the Secretary of Education, has said is for the next couple of years, we won't use the test scores for the evaluation of the school districts and the school performance profiles because it would be apples to oranges. Okay. It would look like the schools have gotten worse.
You're going to wait until we get some baseline,
acclimated
into
2, 3, 4 years of that data. And a similar thing we understand is true about teacher evaluations. I can't say that the teachers did a worse job than the year before because the scores are different. It's a different test, essentially. So in fairness to teachers, in fairness to schools, in fairness to the children, we're going to just say, okay, we still want to have the higher content. We want to push people for higher academic performance. We're going to test that you are achieving that, but we're not going to compare.
But basically you're saying, yeah, let's be fair about it and give people a time.
Right. And there are multiple measures that you can apply to school districts and multiple measures you can apply to the evaluation of teachers.
Is funding based on this at all?
No.
I didn't think so. No. I didn't think it has anything. And
no. Right now, funding is based on nothing.
We need a whole hour to explain the funding.
That's why we want a new funding formula that actually has some real criteria, and that's not just the whim of the General Assembly.
Called fair funding formula, so that it's based on a whole bunch of factors.
But there's nothing about performance in there.
Yeah, nothing.
Nothing about performance.
Okay. All right. Before I let you go, I want to ask you one. We now have the Senate race, and we'll have you back when we get into it. Obviously, it's next year. The Democrats now have the mayor of Braddock, John Featherman, who's now in the race. Democrats have three candidates.
Yes.
And the last candidate, John Featherman, 6'8", Harvard graduate in an old steel town, Braddock.
Bald, full of tattoos, has been highlighted by the New Yorker magazine, New York Times.
Something of a character. Is that fair? Is that fair to say?
But a character who is turning around an area that is really just bereft.
That's what I hear.
When I worked in the state Senate last, that was part of our district. And to see what happened to that, and to see what happened to those people, I mean, this is an area that went from one of America's most prosperous industrial towns to being just nothing but plywood walls, where they boarded things up. And he's turning it around, and that's why even 60 Minutes came to see what he's doing.
Wow.
He likes to say, look, it's not gentrification. Gentrification is when new people come in and push old people out. There's no one to push out. Everyone abandoned us.
Yeah.
But they have torn down buildings, cleared areas, and they're bringing in trendy restaurants. He's putting a lot of work into attracting artsy millennials.
Now I want to interrupt, David. Now remember what we're talking about. The Senate Democratic primary has Joe Sestak, who ran against Pat Toomey in 2010, lost by 2 points. She's not the darling of the Democratic Party, to put it mildly. Katie McGinty, former chief of staff to Secretary to Governor Wolf, I'll get that right, and also worked for Al Gore and Bill Clinton, and worked for Ed Rendell. She's sort of the favorite of the party, and now we have this guy John Featherman out in Western PA. That's why we're talking about him, just in the race. A unique personality. Does he have you need money, you need organization.
6 months ago, I would have said Fetterman has absolutely no chance because of those things. He doesn't have those things. Right. And then since then, we have seen Donald Trump, Carson, and Carly Fiorina, and I'm thinking, I don't know what, and the rules have changed. So the outsider who really has a cachet and who will be followed on social media with independence.
But he still is going to need money and organization to get that done.
With parts of the Democratic Party? That base?
Thanks. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.